Late on Friday night, in an audacious raid inside Venezuela, the US military successfully extracted Venezuela's de facto leader, Nicolás Maduro, from his compound in Caracas. The snatch and grab operation, which was accompanied by a series of airstrikes on other targets elsewhere, was remarkably successful. Maduro was captured without any US casualties before being taken by helicopter to the USS Iwo Jima, and then indicted in a US court a few hours later. Unsurprisingly, the raid has been hailed as a total victory by Trump and his allies. But while Maduro's removal was both tactically impressive and a relief to many Venezuelans, it's unclear what happens next. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at exactly that and try and figure out how things might pan out. If you love staying informed and want some of the best reporting on YouTube, then subscribe and ring the bell for more. So let's get straight into it. What happens next? Well, in the best case scenario from Trump's perspective, Maduro is quickly succeeded by a more pro-American candidate, or at least a more democratically minded one, who oversees Venezuela's democratic restoration and opens the country up to American business interests, especially in the oil sector. The model here is presumably America's intervention in Panama in 1989, when US forces swiftly ousted the unpopular dictator and replaced him with President-elect Guillermo Endara, paving the way for a return to democracy and markedly better relations with the US. If this were to happen, it would be great news for ordinary Venezuelans too, who've suffered terribly under Maduro, but also for the wider region, which has struggled to cope with the massive drug and migration flows out of Venezuela in recent years. For context, something like 8 million Venezuelans have fled the country in the past decade or so, roughly a quarter of the entire population, with most of these migrants ending up in nearby South American countries, especially Colombia. It would also be great news for American oil companies, who might be able to rejuvenate Venezuela's stagnant oil industry, and American oil refiners in the south, who are well equipped to process heavy Venezuelan crude. Dominance over Venezuela's oil industry would also give the US more control over global oil markets, and thus global oil prices, potentially allowing Trump to weaponize oil production against countries like Russia and Iran. You can imagine, for instance, Trump ordering American oil companies to ramp up production in Venezuela in order to push down global prices, thus putting more pressure on both Russia, which relies on oil revenues to fund its war in Ukraine, and Iran, which relies on its oil revenues to fund its nuclear program. Although we should say that it will probably take a fair bit of time to meaningfully increase Venezuela's oil output. Some US policymakers have also argued that Maduro's removal will hurt China, given that it's the main destination for sanctioned Venezuelan crude. You get the idea. In Trump's best-case scenario, Maduro's outing could not only bring stability to the Americas, but also advance peace in Europe and the Middle East, all while giving the US an edge in its escalating geopolitical battle against China. Unfortunately for Trump, however, it's hard to see how all of this happens. In the first instance, it's currently unclear as to who's actually going to succeed Maduro. In a press conference on Saturday, Trump said, quote,
"We are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious because that's what we're all about."
But it's not clear what this actually means or who's going to actually lead the country now. You might think the most obvious candidate would be Venezuela's opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Corina Machado, who ran against Maduro in the 2024 presidential election and is pretty chummy with Marco Rubio. Or maybe Edmundo Gonzalez, who stood in for Machado when she was barred from running. But in an exchange with a reporter after the press conference, Trump ruled out handing over the reins to Machado, apparently on the grounds that she doesn't have enough, quote, respect within the country.
Oh, I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect to be the leader.
At another point in the press conference, Trump seems to suggest that Marco Rubio come to some sort of arrangement with Maduro's vice president, who happened to be in Russia at the time of the operation, saying, quote,
I understand she was just sworn in, but she was, as you know, picked by Maduro. So Marco's working on that directly. He just had a conversation with her, and she's essentially willing to do what we think is necessary to make Venezuela great again. Very simple.
But Delcy herself poured cold water on the idea only a few hours later, when, flanked by a number of other senior ministers from the Maduro administration, gave a press conference on Venezuela's state TV, insisting that Maduro should return as president and that Venezuela would never be the colony of another country. If Maduro is indeed succeeded by Delcy or just another member of his regime, things might actually get worse, not better for Venezuela. You can very easily imagine, for instance, the regime becoming more paranoid and using Maduro's abduction as an all-purpose excuse to crack down on any and every sign of dissent. If something like this does happen, in other words, if Trump's best-case scenario fails to materialize and either Maduro is just succeeded by another equally autocratic member of his regime, or the void left by him generates more political instability, then this will leave the US with a difficult dilemma. Either Trump and co can just let Venezuela descend into chaos with all the attendant regional risks, or they can intervene again. This is something Trump suggested that he'll be open to in his press conference. In his opening remarks, for instance, Trump said that, quote,
"And we are ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so. So we were prepared to do a second wave if we needed to do so. We actually assumed that a second wave would be necessary, but now it's probably not."
And in another exchange with a reporter during the subsequent Q&A, Trump even seemed to imply that the US would be happy to administer Venezuela indefinitely, because, at least according to Trump, the US would be able to recoup any associated costs by skimming off Venezuela's oil reserves.
It won't cost us anything because the money coming out of the ground is very substantial, so it's not going to cost us anything. We're not spending money. The oil companies are going to go in. They're going to spend money. We're going to take back the oil that, frankly, we should have taken back a long time ago. A lot of money is coming out of the ground. We're going to get reimbursed for all of that. We're going to get reimbursed for everything that we spend. So it's going to be a very important. This is a very big evening that took place last night.
In a phone call with The Atlantic on Sunday, Trump even warned that, quote, if Delcy doesn't do what's right, she's going to pay a very big price, probably bigger than Maduro. But whatever form it takes, further intervention would be both risky and controversial. Not only would it go down badly with the international community, who already consider Maduro's ousting a flagrant violation of international law, but also with most Americans. Polling before the operation suggested that at least a plurality of Americans opposed military action of any sort, to say nothing of an open-ended, oil-funded occupation. To be clear, this isn't to say that Trump's best-case scenario won't materialize for certain, or that Delcy won't be an improvement on Maduro. But there is a lot of uncertainty here, and it's not hard to imagine a bad outcome. This is our first brand new video for 2026, and we had to work through Sunday and overnight to make it happen. So if you want to support the channel and help our journalism into the new year, then consider subscribing to our magazine Too Long, with the latest issue focusing on the reshaping of the Middle East. In it, we run through each country in the region to discuss how they're rewriting the next chapter of their story. From Qatar's growing global influence, who could govern the new Gaza, if Iran could dash for a nuke, and how Lebanon can disarm Hezbollah. But there's much more than that inside, with full sections dedicated to UK, EU and global news. The EU section, for instance, includes our interview with fellow creator Money and Macro, where we discuss how to fix the European economy, as well as articles on Macron's fall from grace and how Albania has implemented an AI minister. The global section discusses why Trump's mandate isn't quite what it seems, how politicians have conquered social media, as well as our rundown of the biggest elections that happened in 2025. And our UK section runs through the rise of the new left, while next year's elections are critical at all levels, as well as the strategies that Starmer ought to take to maintain power, and Farage to gain power. Subscribers to Too Long automatically get 20% off every copy as long as they stay subscribed. But as a special end-of-year offer, you can get an additional 30% off your first issue if you use code December25 at checkout. Find out more by heading to toolong.news or by clicking the link in the description.